A cold, rainy night. Inside hospital room 212, an 8-year-old girl sleeps. But exactly at 2:17 a.m., a framed picture of a dog falls to the ground, and the back of her neck turns icy as if something unseen just passed through. Her heart monitor suddenly stabilizes. No doctors, no drugs, no one saw anything. And yet, from that night on, she begins to recover in ways science can't explain. Other children whisper, "A dog visits me every night." This isn't a fairy tale. It's a haunting, heartwarming story that defies all logic, and you'll never forget it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, mysterious, and unforgettable stories like this. The fluorescent lights above the pediatric oncology ward flickered softly, humming with a dull mechanical buzz. Outside, the California sun was bright and merciless. But in here, time moved differently, slower, heavier, thick with antiseptic and sorrow. A nurse in pink scrubs walked toward the security doors, pressing a button on her pager. Then came the click. The door slid open, and in stepped Zoe, 8 years old, pale skin like winter porcelain, eyes too old for a child that size. She held her mother's hand loosely, not with trust but with quiet resignation. Her small suitcase trailed behind her, one wheel skipping with every third step. Her head was wrapped in a soft cotton scarf, though her hair hadn't begun falling out yet. She hadn't started treatment. Not yet. She stopped just before the hallway turn, as though some instinct in her bones had flinched. "Do we have to go in?" she asked. Her mother gave a smile that was trying too hard. "They're going to help you here." Zoe looked up almost expressionless and whispered, "No, they're going to try." Down the hallway, room 212 waited sterile, painted in pastel blue to fool children into thinking it was friendly. But Zoe didn't fall for colors anymore. Dr. Allen greeted them, tall gray at the temples, eyes that looked like they'd seen too many things and remembered everyone. He crouched to Zoe's level. "You must be Zoe," he said gently. She didn't respond. She stared at the floor. They moved inside. As the door closed behind them, a nurse began recording notes on a tablet. The tension was already thick. Over the next 2 hours, the staff tried everything. Explanations cartoons, a therapy dog brought from the lower wing. But Zoe didn't touch the fur, didn't smile. She just stared out the window, unmoving, as if her body was there, but her spirit hadn't caught up. Then came the topic of chemotherapy. The room turned into a battlefield. No, Zoe screamed, writhing in her mother's arms. "Dr. Allen." Allen tried to explain calmly that early treatment increased survival rates dramatically, that they were here to fight together, that she wasn't alone. But Zoe didn't want to fight. She wanted out. She kicked, screamed, and knocked over a tray of paperwork. Her small fists pounded against the sterile sheets. "I'm not sick like that," she yelled. "It's not that kind of sick." The nurses exchanged looks. One whispered, "It's the fear." Some kids react like this at first. But this was more than fear. It was something deeper, older, like Zoe knew something no one else did. By nightfall, her room had quieted. The TV glowed faintly with a cartoon rerun. No one was watching. Her mother dozed in the recliner. Zoe lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles, counting them like scars. Then, without moving, she whispered, "Something's wrong." No one answered. Her mother was asleep. The hallway beyond was quiet, too quiet, save for the faint beep, beep, beep of monitors down the hall. Zoe sat up in bed. Her fingers touched the back of her neck. She froze. It was cold, not the room, not the air, but just the skin on her nape, like breath had brushed it. Her spine stiffened. She turned her head quickly, heart thudding. Nothing. Then came the smell. Not sharp like bleach, not sour like vomit, not chemical like chemo. No, it was warm, like grass after rain. Like dusty fur, like medicine but not human. "Mom," she called softly. Still no response. Zoe turned to the darkness of the room. And in that moment, soft, barely audible, she whispered the sentence that would change everything. "I smell dog medicine." She slid her feet out from the covers barefoot on cool linoleum. I think it came to visit." The temperature around her shifted again. And this time it wasn't just her imagination. A nurse walking the hall passed by the room and felt a chill as she glanced in. But Zoe wasn't shivering. She was smiling, a smile no one else saw. The clock on the wall turned 2:17 a.m. Inside the nurse's station, a red blip flashed once on Zoe's heart monitor, then settled. No alarms went off. But the waveform changed, subtle but unmistakable. Her breathing grew steadier. Her pulse calmer. Back in the room, Zoe spoke again. "I'm okay now," she whispered to the air. "I think it just wanted to check." Moments later, her mother stirred, reached for a blanket, and turned to see Zoe already asleep. No fuss, no crying, just peace. By morning, the incident was nearly forgotten, until the nurse on night shift reported a drop in temperature at the head of Zoe's bed, isolated, not recorded anywhere else in the room. Dr. Allen reviewed the logs. Could be the air vent, someone said. But vents don't drop temps by exactly 4.6 degrees in a straight curved pattern over the nape of a child's neck. And they certainly don't leave behind the scent of dusty fur. Security footage from the hallway showed nothing. No one entered or exited between 1:30 and 3 a.m. Yet Zoe's chart showed signs of stabilization that couldn't be accounted for. Maybe it's just her body adjusting, another nurse offered. Dr. Allen rubbed his chin. "I've seen kids bounce back," he said, "but not overnight. Not like that." That evening, Zoe drew with crayons in bed. Not Disney princesses, not rainbows. A dog, long ears, round eyes, tail tucked. Sitting quietly beside a hospital bed, its snout resting right behind where the pillow ends. A nurse passed by and noticed. "Is that your dog at home?" Zoe shook her head slowly. "No," she said, her voice soft, solemn. "It's the one that visits me here." The nurse smiled nervously, uncertain how to respond. Zoe looked up from her drawing as if she could read the doubt in the adult's eyes. "It comes when I'm scared," she said. "It puts its nose right here." She pointed to the back of her neck, and everything gets quiet. A silence fell in the room. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. The nurse excused herself quickly, trying to act natural. But her hands trembled slightly as she returned to the nurse's station. Behind her, Zoe kept coloring. She picked up the gray crayon, then the blue one, and just before she finished the eyes, she added a faint outline of white around the fur, as if the dog were glowing. "His name is Blue," she whispered. And outside, down the long hallway of room 212, the motion sensor light flicked on by itself. No one was there. But the hallway smelled faintly, not of antiseptic, but something softer, almost like old bandages, fresh grass, and the memory of fur. The next morning started with whispers. The kind of whispers that float behind clipboards and through cracked doors. The kind exchanged over vending machines, between sips of lukewarm coffee layered with concern, curiosity, and quiet disbelief. "She said it again," asked Nurse Carla, glancing over her shoulder, as if Zoe might be listening. Nurse Danny nodded. "Yeah," said. Her neck got cold. Then smelled something. Not chemical, not bleach. She said it smelled like dog medicine. Carla chuckled under her breath. "Kids say weird stuff when they're on morphine." "That's the thing," Danny said. "She's not on morphine." Carla blinked. "She hasn't started any meds yet. No sedatives either. Nothing strong, just fluids and a vitamin bag." Carla paused, her smile fading. "Then why's she talking like she's dreaming with her eyes open?" Danny shrugged and turned back to her screen. "I don't know. But her vitals spiked exactly at 2:17 a.m. Stabilized from 112 BPM down to 86 in under a minute. Breathing regularized. No code, no alarm, just quiet." Carla's brows pinched together. 17? Was that when she said her neck went cold? Exactly. They both looked toward room 212. Inside, Zoe sat up in bed quietly drawing. She hadn't resisted breakfast, hadn't cried, hadn't even asked for her mother. When Dr. Allen came in for his morning rounds, he glanced at the monitor, checked her pulse, then looked at the girl sitting cross-legged like a monk in her sterile sanctuary. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, gently pulling the stethoscope from around his neck. Zoe looked up, then down again at her sketchpad. "Better. Any pain?" "No." He moved behind her, gently placing the stethoscope on her back, then her chest. "Take a deep breath for me." She did. Again, she obeyed, smooth and steady. Then he paused and asked, "Do you remember anything about last night?" She didn't respond immediately. Then, without lifting her eyes, she said, "He came again." Dr. Allen leaned in him. Zoe nodded. "Blue. That's the dog's name." "Yes." He hesitated. "And he came into the room." "No," Zoe said, shaking her head gently. "He doesn't need to walk. Does he talk to you?" "No. Just breathes. Right here." She pointed to the back of her neck again. "Like he's checking if I'm still here." Alan's face twitched, somewhere between scientific skepticism and a flicker of belief he hated to acknowledge. He rose, noting everything in his chart. But later, in the privacy of the doctor's lounge, he opened Zoe's telemetry data from the overnight log. There it was. At exactly 2:17:03 a.m., her heart rate dropped from 111 to 87 in less than 15 seconds. Blood oxygen climbed. Respiration smoothed. All this without medication, without any nurse entering the room, without movement. It was a perfect, inexplicable stabilization. Alan zoomed in on the temperature overlay from the wall-mounted sensor. A 4-inch semicircular drop in surface temperature appeared at 2:16:59 a.m., just above her pillow, Geico. He leaned back in his chair. "Kids don't fake thermographic anomalies," he muttered. Back in room 212, Nurse Danny noticed something else. Zoe had stopped grinding her teeth. Before, every time the ward lights dimmed at night, Zoe would clench her jaw, her whole body tensed like she was bracing for war. But now, nothing. That night, Danny decided to stay closer. She requested to sit the observation shift, tucked herself behind the window of the next-door room with her tablet, and waited. At 1:30 a.m., Zoe stirred once. At 2:00, she rolled over. At 2:16, the back of her neck exposed as she shifted under her sheets. Then came the chill. It wasn't visible, but Danny felt it even from behind glass. Like the air pressure had changed thicker, somehow, quieter. She checked the monitor. 112 BPM, 217:01 104 BPM, 217:10 93 BPM. Zoe's chest rose, fell, then again, slower, quieter. She smiled in her sleep. Danny stood, breath caught in her throat, eyes darting to the thermograph feed. Again the same anomaly. Same curve, same place, exactly the nape, exactly the same time. She looked into the room, and though there was no movement, no shadow, no breeze, every hair on Danny's arm stood on end. The monitor beeped, then normalized. Everything returned to peace. The next morning, Zoe awoke humming. Her mother was wide-eyed, amazed. "She hasn't done that in months," she whispered, tears already welling. Danny brought Zoe breakfast herself. Zoe looked up and smiled. "He's nice," she said suddenly. Danny blinked. "Who?" "Blue." Pause. Zoe sipped her orange juice, then added, "He comes when I'm about to fall. Then I stop falling." Danny forced a smile and backed out of the room, her fingers tight around the tray. Down the hallway, she pulled Dr. Allen aside. "You need to see this," she said, showing him the feed. He stared at the footage. Telemetry, infrared, the exact minute, the curve, the vitals, the smile. He pinched the bridge of his nose and exhaled. "This is a child. No drugs, no meds, no sedation, no fever, no hallucinations," Danny added. "She's sharp, calm, consistent." Alan looked up, and she keeps saying the same name. "Blue." He stared at the hallway wall as if it might give him answers. Then quietly, almost guiltily, he asked, "Didn't we have a therapy dog years ago?" Danny's eyes widened. "You don't think?" "I don't know what I think. But I'm starting to wonder if this girl isn't sick, in the way we thought." The next day, a staff meeting was called. Dr. Myers, head of oncology, dismissed the conversation. "We're here to treat cancer," she said firmly, "not chase ghost dogs." But the data Alan began. Coincidence? 2 nights. Same temperature curve, same stabilization window, same sensory hallucination. "Or maybe you're projecting," she snapped. "You're tired, Alan. You've seen too many kids die." That silenced the room. Alan stood, collected his folder, and said, "I hope that's not all I'm seeing." Back in 212, Zoe asked for crayons again. When her mother handed her the sketch pad, Zoe whispered, "Can I draw him again?" She did. This time the dog was larger, more defined, wearing something around his neck like a hospital bandana. His eyes were round and mournful, staring directly forward. On the side of the drawing, she wrote one word in crooked, uneven block letters. Blue. By the end of the week, Zoe had slept 3 nights without a single cry, tremor, or nightmare. Her appetite returned. Her vitals, though still under watch, were stable without invasive medication. The only change, the cold touch at 2:17 a.m. Each night, each time. Dr. Allen started reading back through old hospital archives, not files. Photos? He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that something inside him was beginning to bend. A memory, maybe, of a dog with soft eyes, a blue scarf, and a hallway that once felt warmer because of him. That night, before leaving his shift, he paused by room 212. Zoe was asleep. Her mother dozed off in the chair again, a magazine in her lap. Alan looked through the glass quietly, then noticed something strange. Zoe's sketch pad was still open beside her, face down. He leaned closer, squinting. It had a paw print on it, smudged in graphite near the corner. Not a child's doodle, too defined, too real, too deliberate. He turned and walked away quickly, trying not to think about it. But in his chest, something shifted, something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not awe, but belief. 3 nights had passed since the temperature anomalies began. Each time 2:17 a.m., each time the nape of Zoe's neck, each time calm after chaos. But what startled the staff wasn't just her stabilized vitals or the invisible cold that returned like clockwork. It was her stillness afterward, the kind that didn't belong in a cancer ward. Zoe wasn't fighting anymore. She was waiting for something only she could sense. Late into the 4th evening, Nurse Danny returned for her shift clipboard in hand and paused by room 212. Zoe was sitting upright in bed, legs crossed beneath her sketchpad, balanced on her knees. The lights above her buzzed faintly, and the television played some cartoon in the background, completely ignored. Danny knocked softly. "What are you working on?" Zoe didn't look up. He came again. Danny stepped inside, blue. Zoe nodded, still sketching. He didn't stay long, just one sniff. "I think he's making sure I'm not scared." The words were so simple, so matter-of-fact, it sent a chill down Danny's back. She walked slowly to the side of the bed, glancing at the sketchpad. What she saw there made her throat tighten. It wasn't a child's usual drawing, not some cartoon dog with floppy ears and a big pink tongue. No rainbows or bones or hearts. It was precise, intuitive, raw. Drawn entirely in graphite, the image showed a medium-sized dog with pointed ears and a downturned gaze. The eyes were glassy shaded dark with such intensity it almost seemed like they were wet. The coat was textured, layered strokes, giving it a soft, smoky appearance, gray with hints of blue. Around the dog's neck was a scarf triangular with the unmistakable logo of the hospital embroidered faintly on the corner. "He looked like this?" Danny asked, voice thin. Zoe nodded, except he glowed a little, like moonlight. "But my pencils can't do that." Danny couldn't speak. She reached for her pager but stopped midway. "Can I show this to someone?" she asked. Zoe hesitated, then shrugged. "If they won't yell." Dr. Allen was in his office, the room dim except for a desk lamp casting gold onto his hands as he sifted through archived files. He hadn't slept much. Something about the pattern, the exact timing, the scent, the vital signs gnawed at the edge of his logic. When Danny entered without knocking, he looked up startled. "You need to see this," she said, holding out the sketchpad like evidence. He took it, blinking once, then twice, and then his whole body stilled. He slowly lowered himself into his chair. The image in his hands took him back 5, maybe 6 years. A different floor, a different Zoe, a different time, but the same eyes, the same scarf. "That's Blue," he whispered. "You knew him." Dr. Allen nodded, voice catching in his throat. "Therapy dog, Australian Shepherd mix. He used to work the pediatric oncology wing. Belonged to one of the child psychologists, Dr. Reyes. What happened to him?" Allen looked down at the sketch again. "He died. Cancer. Bone cancer, if I remember right." The irony was unbearable. Danny lowered herself into the chair opposite him. "Zoe's never met him, never seen a picture. I never told her his name." They sat in silence. The overhead light buzzed. Finally, Allen asked, "Do you remember the girl in room 309 3 years ago? The one who wouldn't eat after her second relapse?" Danny nodded. "Madeline. Blue used to sleep beside her every night. He'd whine when she cried. He'd lick her arm where the IV went in." Danny looked back at the sketchpad. "She pulled through." Allen nodded. "She called Blue her miracle. Zoe says he smells like dog medicine." Allen closed the folder in front of him. "She's right. His fur always smelled faintly like antiseptic. Reyes bathed him in this medicated shampoo because he had a skin allergy. And now, he's back." Allen didn't respond. He didn't have to. That night, Allen visited Zoe himself. No chart, no stethoscope, just a soft knock and a quiet presence. She was coloring again. "You remember Blue?" she asked without looking up. Allen sat in the chair by her bed. "Yes, I knew him." Zoe smiled. "He doesn't bark, he just watches. His eyes are kind of sad." Allen swallowed hard. They always were. She glanced at him. "Why did he die?" Allen exhaled slowly. His bones broke inside him. They tried to fix it, but it was too late. Zoe was quiet for a while, pressing the pencil harder into the paper. "He said that's why he comes back." Allen blinked. "He told you that?" Zoe shrugged. "Not with words. Just, I feel it." They sat in stillness. Then Zoe looked at the photo on her bedside table, her and her mom at the beach before the illness. He knows when people are almost too tired, she said. Like they want to leave. Alan's eyes misted. You feel like that sometimes? She nodded slowly. But not when he's here. Alan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a tiny photo creased from years in his wallet. It was Blue, younger, smiling, a little scruffy. Zoe's eyes lit up. That's him, but older. He was already old when I met him, Alan said, handing her the picture. But he was patient. He never left a room before the child fell asleep. Zoe touched the photo gently, then whispered, "He doesn't sleep anymore." Alan didn't know what to say to that. Elsewhere in the hospital, whispers were beginning again. The new shift nurses had heard the story. Some rolled their eyes. Others just nodded slowly, as if part of them needed to believe something like this could be true. A tech from imaging offered to check for anomalies on Zoe's night feed again. Another nurse admitted seeing movement near the edge of the monitor, nothing defined, just a shift in pixel shadows near the bed. They weren't sure what they were hunting anymore. Truth, faith, or just comfort. The next night, a storm rolled across the California sky. Thunder trembled in the ceiling tiles, and the rain fell like glass beads against the window. Zoe was asleep by 8:30 p.m. Her mother sat beside her with a book, half reading, half praying. At 2:16 a.m., Danny stood at the monitor, pen in hand. She didn't blink. At 2:17 a.m., the same curve appeared on the thermograph. Same drop, same location. At the exact same second, Zoe smiled in her sleep and exhaled a long, peaceful breath that turned the chaos inside her tiny body into order. But something was different. The monitor flickered once, and for a brief moment, no more than a single frame, Danny swore she saw it. Not a body, not a dog, just two faint phosphorescent dots hovering above Zoe's pillow, eyes staring gently downward. Gone in an instant, but she saw them, and this time she didn't question it. The next morning, Zoe added something to her sketch, not to Blue, to herself. She drew herself lying in bed. The IV, the monitor, and Blue beside her, but in her version, his front paws touched the back of her neck. A shimmer surrounded his outline, like heat waves rising from pavement. She titled the drawing, "When He Knows I'm Almost Gone." Dr. Allen hung the drawing on his office wall that afternoon. He didn't explain it to anyone, but when he looked at it, he felt something move inside him. Not dread, not disbelief, but memory and hope, a silent, fur-covered echo of both. Blue had come back, and whatever he was now, spirit echo warmth in the cold, he was doing what he always did, saving the ones who were ready to give up. The room was silent as Zoe held the photo in her small hands. Her thumb brushed gently across the worn paper, tracing the shape of the dog's ear. She didn't blink, didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. She simply looked up at Dr. Allen and said, "That's him." Allen's breath caught. "You're sure?" Zoe nodded. "That's the dog that comes. He sniffs right here," she said, pointing to the back of her neck. Just like that. Allen sat beside her, watching her expression for any sign of uncertainty. But there was none. No guessing. No hesitation. Just the quiet certainty of a child who's seen something grown-ups no longer can. He leaned in slightly. "Zoe, how do you know?" She looked back at the photo. Her voice came low, almost like she was reciting something from a place deeper than memory. "He smells like medicine. Like when you're about to sleep, but not all the way asleep yet. And he makes my neck cold, but not in a bad way. Just enough to stop the fear." Allen looked at the photo himself. It was an old image taken during a staff Christmas party years ago. Blue sat in front of a little tree with a ribbon tied around his neck and a paper party hat perched crookedly between his ears. Behind him, several children in pajamas grinned wide. Most of those children were no longer alive. Zoe's voice broke the silence again. "He's sad sometimes," she said. "But when he's near, I don't feel alone." Allen's hands trembled slightly as he took the photo back. He stood, heart thudding in his chest, and left the room without another word. Down the hall, nurses gathered at the station, Danny among them, along with Carla and two others from the early shift. Allen held the photo up to them without explanation. Danny was the first to react. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, that's..." Carla stepped forward slowly. "Blue," she whispered. "I haven't seen this picture in years." Allen nodded. Zoe recognized him immediately. She said he's the one who visits her. The room fell into stunned silence. "She's never seen this dog before," he continued. "No posters, no photos, no stories. No one's mentioned him around her. This was buried in my file cabinet until last night." Danny sank into her chair. "You're saying?" "I'm saying." She described his smell, his scarf, the cold at her neck. She's drawn him accurately, multiple times. And now this. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a voice broke through, shaking and brittle. She remembered the cold, said a nurse from the ICU. Her name was Tricia. She'd worked night shifts during Blue's final months. "Excuse me," Alan turned to her. "I had a patient. 2 years ago, a 5-year-old girl. Brain tumor. She was slipping fast, couldn't keep food down, couldn't sleep. Blue would lie on the floor by her bed every night. But when it got bad, when it got really bad, he'd put his nose right here." She gestured to the back of her own neck. She'd stop crying. Just like that. Alan stared at her. "Why the neck?" "I don't know," Tricia said. "We never understood it. But I saw him do it with 3 or 4 kids. Only when things were turning." "And they'd calm down?" Danny asked. "Every time." Another nurse, Mitchell, joined in, his voice tight. "You remember that boy Lucas? The one who was terrified of IV's Blue would sit next to him while we put the line in. He never flinched if Blue was there." Carla's eyes glistened. "He sat next to my niece the night she died. Never moved. Not even when they came to take her away." A silence spread heavy and sacred. "We never talked about it," Mitchell said. "It always felt like we'd break something holy if we tried to explain it." Alan placed the photo on the center desk. "There's more," he said. "The thermographs, the vitals, the timing." He pulled up the telemetry data again, the infrared overlays. The now familiar drop in temperature just above the pillow. 2:17 a.m. Every night. "You think it's him?" Carla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think he came back?" Alan didn't answer immediately. Then quietly, simply, he said, "I think something we don't understand is helping that girl. And every time it happens the same way Blue used to help them." Danny spoke next, slow and deliberate. "If that's true, if he's really doing this, then maybe he never really left." No one scoffed. No one laughed. No one reached for science or sarcasm. Instead, they listened and remembered, because each of them, every single one, had a memory of Blue. The way he padded silently down the hall. The way he curled up beside children who screamed in pain but stopped crying when he arrived. The way he sat at the foot of a bed, unmoving on the night a child passed away. And how he left the room only after the heart monitor stopped. His presence had been more than comforting. It had been sacred. That afternoon, Alan visited the staff memorial room. A quiet place tucked in the northeast wing. Inside were photographs, nameplates, and a few worn teddy bears left behind by families. In the far corner, a small framed photo hung among the others. Blue. It had a ribbon pinned into the edge, therapy companion, 2011 to 2021. Alan stood there for several minutes alone. Then he took the frame down. Later that evening, he returned to Zoe's room. She looked up from her book, her face tired but calm. He handed her the frame. "This is the official photo," he said. Zoe's eyes widened. She took it, studied it closely, then smiled. "It's him, but younger." Alan lowered himself into the chair beside her. "Zoe, he died 2 years ago. Cancer. The same kind you're fighting." Zoe blinked, then looked at the picture again. She didn't look shocked. She looked like she already knew. "He told me," she said softly. Alan froze. "He what?" Not like a voice, just a feeling. Like he understands. That's why he comes. Because he knows what it's like. Alan swallowed hard. "He used to do this for the other kids, too." Zoe nodded. "I know." And then, without prompting, she whispered, "Sometimes when people love too much, they don't really go. They just wait until someone else needs it." Alan didn't have anything left to say, so he stayed. For over an hour, he sat in that chair listening to Zoe talk, not about treatments or pills or pain, but about Blue, about his eyes, his smell, the way he curled at the foot of the bed, the soft sound his claws made on the tile floor. Memories she should not have had, but did. And as the sun dipped behind the hospital's cold windows, a new kind of warmth filled room 212. The warmth of memory, of loyalty, of something that had died, yes, but had never really left. Blue was gone, but not absent. And in this strange space between science and spirit, between hope and heartbreak, one thing became undeniably clear. Some dogs don't stay for just one lifetime. Some come back, especially when they're needed most. The decision to install the thermal camera wasn't official. It was quiet, off the record. Alan's idea. And it happened late on a Wednesday night, one of those nights, where the rain had stopped just short of touching the hospital windows, leaving only silence in its place. "We don't log it," Alan told Danny, handing her the small heat sensor unit. "No paperwork, no questions." She looked at it like it might bite her. "You're seriously doing this? You've seen the data, the vitals, the patterns. There's something there. I just want to see it." "But what if we do?" she asked, lowering her voice. Alan didn't answer. He couldn't. The camera was installed discreetly in room 212 that evening, disguised inside a wall-mounted air purifier just above Zoe's headboard. No one told her. No one told her mother. It faced downward at an angle perfectly aligned with the place her head would be at 2:17 a.m. Danny watched the feed from the adjacent room. 2 monitors, one for vitals, one for thermal imaging. At 200 a.m. Zoe turned in her sleep just slightly enough to bare the back of her neck. The vitals monitor blinked, steady, unremarkable. 2:12 a.m. The line on the graph pulsed 94 BPM. 14 a.m. a subtle increase, 98 BPM. 2:16, 4301 BPM. Slight arrhythmia, normal for her condition. Then it began. 2:59. The thermal feed shifted. No sudden spike, no mechanical glitch. Just a soft dip in temperature, a delicate crescent-shaped imprint forming above Zoe's pillow. Cooler than the rest of the room by 4 degrees. Slowly, unmistakably, it bent forward as if something leaned in. The outline was subtle, almost abstract. But the curve rounded at one end, tapered at the other, was eerily familiar. Not a hand, not human, a snout. 2:17:03. Zoe's vitals dropped from 102 to 86 BPM in 11 seconds. Blood pressure stabilized. Respiration deepened. Oxygen saturation climbed by 2%. All within 30 seconds of the thermal signature appearing. Danny stared frozen. The pattern remained visible for 47 seconds, then evaporated as if it had never been there. But the data had already logged everything. Zoe, meanwhile, stirred under the covers. She rolled her head slightly, smiled in her sleep, and murmured something almost too soft to hear. "Blue." The next morning, Alan didn't go to his office. He went straight to Danny. She was already waiting, eyes rimmed red from staying up all night with the footage on loop. "He came," she said quietly. Alan sat beside her. She replayed the sequence. No filters, no edits. Just the raw footage. They watched together in silence as the curve formed again. Slight, subtle, delicate. A shimmer of absence rather than presence. The way you might notice the shape of wind in tall grass. When the signature touched the back of Zoe's neck, her vitals spiked into a healthy rhythm. It was undeniable. Alan's face was unreadable, not disbelief. Something worse, something deeper. The slow, humiliating surrender of a man who had built a career on measurable facts, now staring at the one thing he couldn't measure. "You ever see anything like this?" Danny asked. Alan didn't answer at first. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands over his mouth. "I saw a man die once," he said finally. Massive stroke. But just before his brain flatlined, he looked behind me like he saw something. He glanced up. I turned. There was nothing there. But he said one word. He said, "Finally." Then he smiled and left. Danny blinked. I always thought it was neurons firing nonsense. Oxygen deprivation, dying brain cells. But now Alan looked at the screen again. Now I'm not so sure. He opened his laptop and pulled Zoe's telemetry from the previous 7 nights. The same time, the same rhythm. Each incident occurred precisely at 2:17 a.m., each followed by stabilization. Same pattern. Every time Alan murmured. Until last week, she was deteriorating. Now she's plateauing. In some areas, she's improving. And the hospital has no clue. Alan nodded. They think she's responding to vitamin therapy. No one's asking why. They're just grateful it's not getting worse. He paused, then said quietly, "But you and I both know what's really happening here." Danny's voice was firm. "It's not an anomaly. It's a visitation." Alan stared at her. It wasn't medical language. It was something older, older than science, older than the building they stood in. Later that afternoon, Alan printed 2 still images from the thermal footage and placed them side by side. One showed the curve. The other showed Blue, drawn by Zoe, his nose gently tucked near her neck. The match was impossible to ignore. Not pixel perfect, not scientific, but emotionally, spiritually, exact. Blue's nose had always been long, thin, almost delicate. The thermal image bore the same sloping line, the same gentle incline, a signature of something that didn't exist in the hospital anymore, but had returned anyway. He looked at the image and whispered, "What are you?" Word spread, but not loudly. The nurses talked in whispers. Some asked to see the footage. Others declined, too afraid they'd believe it. Too afraid it would make the rest of the world seem pale. Tricia, the ICU nurse, cried when she saw the image. "He never liked to leave a child in pain," she said. Carla stared at the curve and just whispered, "It's him." Mitchell didn't speak at all. He just took a copy of the image, folded it carefully, and placed it in the breast pocket of his scrubs. No one wanted to post it. No one wanted to share it on social media. This wasn't a meme. It wasn't a ghost story for likes. This was sacred. Zoe never asked about the camera. But one night, while Danny was checking her IV line, she looked up and said softly, "Did he leave a paw print this time?" Danny froze. "No," she replied, "but something else." Zoe smiled. "He only leaves paw prints when he thinks you're scared." Danny felt her eyes sting but didn't let the tears fall. Not yet. That evening, Alan walked the long hallway back to his office. He passed room 309, now empty, and paused. A memory struck him so hard, it stopped him cold. 3 years ago, a little boy named Henry, terminal, no appetite, no words, barely moved. Blue came into that room one night, uninvited. Alan had been there. He remembered. The dog had walked straight up to Henry's bed, rested his muzzle gently against the side of the boy's throat, and stayed for over an hour. Henry didn't move. But when he finally did, he reached up and placed his hand on Blue's head. The first movement he'd made in days. Henry died a week later, but those last days were lucid, peaceful, pain-free. Everyone chalked it up to the morphine. Now Alan wasn't so sure. That night alone in his office, Alan played the thermal video one last time. He watched the curve form, watched Zoe's numbers level, watched her chest rise and fall in perfect rhythm. And then he closed the laptop, sat back in his chair, and whispered the words he'd never thought he'd say. "I don't understand this." He said it not with fear, not with weakness, but with awe and surrender. In room 212, Zoe turned it over in her sleep again. Outside her door, a motion sensor light flickered on. No one was there. But down the long, empty corridor, the faint smell of fur and medicated shampoo drifted through the vents like a memory that refused to die. The hospital conference room was small, windowless, and humming with tension. Dr. Allen stood stiff at one end of the table, hands clasped behind his back. On the wall behind him, 2 thermal images were pinned like courtroom evidence. One showed the crescent curve of cold air above Zoe's neck. The other, her stabilized vitals, time-stamped 2:17 a.m. Across the table, the hospital board, 4 executives in pressed suits and guarded expressions watched with polite discomfort. "This isn't some viral hoax," Allen said. "This is hard data. Repeatable. Same time, same physiological response, same location." Dr. Myers, the chair of pediatric oncology, tapped her pen. "And what exactly do you want us to do with this?" "Investigate. Officially. Track other patients. Run more sensors. If this presence, whatever it is helping these kids, we need to understand it." "You're suggesting we institutionalize ghost hunting?" one board member muttered. "It's not about belief," Allen shot back. "It's about healing. This thing, this phenomenon, is correlating with real measurable improvement. We owe it to our patients to look deeper," Myers sighed. "Or we risk a PR disaster. One leak to the press, and we become the haunted hospital. You want reporters knocking on doors asking if dead dogs are treating cancer?" Silence. Allen's fists clenched behind his back. "There are forces we don't understand. We should at least have the courage to admit it." "You're a doctor, Allen, not a priest." Another voice. "We cannot endorse comfort apparitions as therapy. It discredits the entire foundation of evidence-based care." The final blow came soft, clinical, and cruel. "This ends now." That afternoon, room 212 changed. The wall-mounted air purifier was removed. The thermal camera vanished. The logs were scrubbed from the system. The photo of Blue, which had hung by Zoe's bed since Allen gave it to her, was taken down without explanation. When Zoe returned from her physical therapy session, she noticed it instantly. Her eyes locked onto the blank spot on the wall, like it was a crime scene. "Where is he?" she asked. Nurse Danny hesitated. They just needed to clean the frame, I think." Zoe didn't speak. She just climbed back into bed, turned her face to the wall, and stopped talking for the rest of the day. That evening, her chart was updated. Resuming standard chemotherapy protocol. Dosage full cycle. Begin 22 hours. Alan didn't sign the order. Myers did. When the nurse came in to prep Zoe's line, the child flinched like she'd been burned. "No," she said, voice sharp. "I'm not doing it again." Her mother tried to soothe her. "Zoe, baby, it's just—" "I said no." The scream echoed down the hall. Zoe thrashed in her sheets as the IV needle approached. "You made him leave," she cried. "You took him away. It's just for tonight." "No. He can't come when this is in me." The monitor beeped, heart rate climbing. Danny rushed in to help, but Zoe kicked the tray and sent the supplies clattering across the floor. Then suddenly convulsions. Zoe's back arched violently. Her eyes rolled. "Seizure," someone yelled. The room flooded with code blue chaos. Alarms shrieked. A crash cart barreled in. Her mother sobbed, clinging to the foot of the bed. Zoe's limbs jerked uncontrollably, her face white with sweat, mouth frothing. Danny held her as best she could, whispering through tears. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. You're okay." Zoe's head whipped to the side, and even in the seizure, her voice tore from her throat like a blade. "You chased him away." And just like that, the shaking stopped. Stillness. The monitor's wail flatlined, then spiked back to life in a sudden rhythm. A breath. Another. She was conscious again, barely. But her eyes were full of rage and betrayal. "You made him leave," she whispered, eyes locked on the ceiling. Then she turned her face to the wall again and said no more. They sedated her, just enough to stabilize, just enough to stop the fight. Alan stormed into Myers' office the next morning, slamming a file down on her desk. "She wasn't ready. You pushed her too fast. She has aggressive lymphoma," Myers replied, calm and cold. "Every day we delay is a risk." She was improving on the basis of a thermal anomaly and bedtime fairy tales. Alan leaned in. She said he was gone. Then she seized. "Coincidence. I'm not in the business of chasing ghosts. You're in the business of saving children." And something was saving her. Something. She scoffed. A dead dog, a soul, a presence, a bond. I don't care what word we use. Whatever it was, she trusted it. That's not medicine, Alan. That's mythology. And mythology saves people more than you know. She stood. "You're suspended. 2 weeks. Effective immediately." He didn't argue, didn't speak, just turned and walked out. Back in room 212, Zoe lay curled under the sheets, eyes open but vacant. She didn't eat lunch. She didn't speak to Danny. When her mother placed a new stuffed dog on the pillow, she rolled away. That night at 2:17 a.m., the temperature in the room stayed steady. No drop, no curve, no crescent breath at her neck. And on the monitor, for the first time in 6 nights, her heart rate spiked. The alarms didn't trigger, but the lines told a story. Without Blue. Zoe was afraid again. At 3:04 a.m., Danny couldn't sleep. She walked back to the nurse's station, pulled up the footage. Nothing, not even a flicker. She opened her drawer. Inside was a folded image, the curve printed from the original footage before it was deleted. She stared at it, then whispered, "Come back." Down the hallway, a light flickered, then steadied, but the air stayed warm. Still, empty. The hospital had returned to order. Paperwork resumed. IVs were replaced. Protocols were obeyed. But something had shifted beneath the surface. A cold war of belief and denial, of logic and grief, of healing. And the mysterious thing that had once walked silently through the pediatric ward. Not asking for attention, only leaving comfort behind. Now it was gone, banished by policy. And in its place, the cruel antiseptic clarity of science alone. But Zoe hadn't forgotten, and neither had the nurses. And neither deep down had Dr. Allen. Because once something impossible touches the real world, it never fully disappears. The hospital never kept a formal record of what Blue did. No daily logs, no official notes, no medical entries. Just memories scattered across the minds of night shift nurses, broken parents, and children who had once clung to hope like it was a string tied to his tail. He had moved silently through the halls. No leash, no handler, just a scarf around his neck and a look in his eyes that said he knew. He always knew. The flashback began with a door creaking open, in memory one that belonged not to Zoe's story, but to those who came before. Room 307, winter 4 years ago. Blue padded into the room just past midnight. A girl lay curled beneath a mountain of blankets. No hair, no sound, no heartbeat above 70. She hadn't spoken in days, didn't cry, didn't flinch. She had been orphaned at 6. Cancer came at 8. This was her 12th night in the hospital. Blue entered, sat at the foot of her bed, and didn't move for 2 hours. At 2:13 a.m., the girl stirred. She turned her head slowly, whispered dog. Blue rose, padded forward, and rested his snout on the back of her neck. Her shoulders stopped shaking. Then incredibly she slept. The next night he came again. Same hour, same quiet. This time she said his name. Blue. She had never been told it. No one had said it aloud. But she knew. Nurses cried when she started eating again. When her blood work improved. When her voice returned. 2 weeks later her scans came back clean. Dr. Reyes, the child psychologist who had first brought Blue to the hospital, never filed a report on that recovery. She called it an outlier, a fluke, an emotional rebound. But she wrote one thing in her journal that night. He licked her neck, like a goodbye, and she lived. Another night, another room. A boy named Caleb dying of complications. Morphine in his veins, fear in his lungs. Screaming every time someone touched him. He couldn't trust anyone, not even his mother. But Blue entered, didn't approach, just lay down near the bed and waited for hours, until Caleb reached down in the dark and let his fingers brush the dog's fur. Silence followed. That night Caleb didn't scream. Blue stayed with him every night until the end. When it came, he didn't leave the room until the body did. Not once, not even when called. And now in the stillness of room 212, Zoe sat alone. A tray of untouched breakfast sat beside her. Her face was pale, her hands weak. The seizure had taken something from her, something invisible but heavy. Danny entered quietly. She carried something beneath her arm. Zoe didn't look up until the sound of a frame being placed on the nightstand reached her. Then she turned. It was the photo, the old one, the one that had been taken from her. Blue with his scarf, half a smile, that gentle, knowing gaze. Zoe reached out slowly, touched the glass with her fingertips. The smallest smile cracked across her lips. Danny sat beside her. No words, just presence. After a minute, Zoe whispered, "He was here," until they told him not to be. Danny blinked away tears. "I know." Zoe looked at the photo. "I don't care if they don't believe me." Her voice had steel in it now, not loud, but solid. "If no one else does, I still do." She reached up, propped the photo beside her pillow. "He can come back now," she said. "I'm not scared anymore." In the staff lounge, Alan stared at the floor. He hadn't gone home in 3 days. He kept playing scenes in his mind. Blue curled beside a dying child. Blue pacing near the ICU the night of that blackout. Blue sitting outside Alan's office door when the chemotherapy shortage nearly turned deadly. He had always known when something was wrong, even when humans didn't, especially then. Blue had no degree, no license, no badge, just intuition and loyalty that didn't stop at death. Alan rose from his chair and walked to the old therapy files. Not the digital ones, those had been scrubbed of any non-medical interactions. But the paper logs were still there, buried beneath 10 years of institutional dust. He flipped through pages, then stopped. Case Lucy H. Orphaned. Stage 4, neuroblastoma, declared terminal. But 3 weeks after unusual behavioral response to therapy canine, her vitals began improving. Unexplained, no protocol changes. One line handwritten at the bottom by Dr. Reyes. Dog laid muzzle on child's neck nightly for 15 minutes. Decline reversed. Unknown correlation. Anecdotal. Alan whispered to himself. It was never anecdotal. It was deliberate. It was real. Back in room 212, Zoe was drawing again. A single image, her bed, the scarfed dog beside her. But this time, a second figure stood by the door. Faint, unclear, but not menacing. Just watching. A silhouette with a stethoscope. Alan, Blue's watcher. That evening, Danny paused by Zoe's room, watching her sleep. The photo of Blue glowed faintly in the lamplight. The child's breath rose and fell steadily. No tremors, no panic. At 2:17 a.m., the temperature monitor in the hallway dipped, just slightly, just enough. In the control room, someone new sat on overnight duty. A young tech, curious, skeptical. But when the curve appeared gentle, exact, unmistakable, he stood from his chair and walked out. Didn't speak, didn't log it, just went home early and called his mother and cried. Blue was dead, everyone agreed. But his story wasn't, because a story doesn't end when the last breath goes out. Sometimes it waits like breath on the back of your neck. Quiet, constant. And Zoe, whether by faith, by instinct, or by something older, knew it. She pulled the covers up under her chin, rolled to face the photo again. "If you come back," she whispered, "I won't let them send you away again." The hallway lights dimmed. The room went still, and for the first time in days, the faintest shimmer of cold whispered against her skin. Not biting, not fearful, just enough to let her know he heard. The war didn't begin with shouting. It began with silence, with glances exchanged between nurses at the end of a shift, with clipboard pages quietly tucked into personal bags, with sticky notes passed under monitors and questions asked with more caution than curiosity. The official position was clear. The hospital did not endorse the story of a ghost dog, but inside those walls, something was happening that policy couldn't contain. It started with Danny. After the photo of Blue was removed from Zoe's room, she printed another one. Black and white, a small version, tucked into a dollar store frame. She slipped it behind the stuffed animal on Zoe's nightstand without a word. Zoe saw it the next morning and smiled. That night at 2:17 a.m., the cold shimmer returned. The next day, Zoe ate a full breakfast. By the end of that week, 2 other children in the oncology ward began reporting the cold dog. Not by name, not even by description, just quiet comments. There's something warm that feels cold first. I smell medicine, but not bad medicine. I dream about a blue dog who just sits. None of these children had ever spoken to Zoe, and none of them had seen the original photos. Danny told no one at first, but she began keeping a private log. Case number 2, Jonah, 6 years old. Leukemia. Reported neck coldness at 2:14 a.m. Vitals improved post-episode. Case number 3, Naomi, 9. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Dreamt of a gray dog smiling at her in a hospital scarf. Drew it in art therapy the next morning. It wasn't just a pattern. It was spreading. By the 3rd week, there were 5 names on the unofficial list. Dr. Allen found out during rounds. Danny handed him a folded paper expression, unreadable. He opened it in the elevator, reading the notes in silence. When he reached the bottom, he whispered, "They're all stable." She nodded. No official interventions. Nope. No medication changes. Just the dog. He didn't say a word for the rest of the ride. The resistance came quickly. A junior physician, Dr. Kai Romero, barely 30, brilliant, devoutly clinical, overheard a group of nurses discussing the temperature curve in the staff lounge. He called it mass hysteria. Then he filed a report to the administration. 2 days later, Danny was summoned to HR. She was warned about distributing unsanctioned imagery in patient rooms and engaging in unscientific discussion while on duty. Dr. Romero was promoted to deputy resident coordinator. Danny's overtime shifts were cut in half. The message was clear: comply or be erased. But it didn't stop the others. Nurse Carla began slipping mini prints of Blue into coloring books. Tricia left a laminated drawing on the supply cart each night, never in the same room twice. One appeared taped inside an IV drawer. Another tucked under a tea bag in the break room. A quiet rebellion built from ink and belief. Allen began documenting vitals himself manually, not on the hospital servers. In a leather-bound notebook he hadn't used in years. Every spike, every pulse drop, every thermal dip, every whisper from a child who said, "I'm not scared anymore." Then came the first real threat. Dr. Elena Zhang Young, talented newly transferred, was caught reviewing Danny's thermograph files late one night. She wasn't part of the group. She didn't know the story, but she was curious. When Allen found her sitting alone, eyes wide, watching the curve form over Zoe's neck, she turned to him and whispered, "I thought this was all a myth." "It's not," he said. That week, Dr. Zhang submitted a proposal to the review board requesting permission to conduct an internal study on non-traditional therapeutic phenomena in terminal pediatric cases. It was denied. 2 days later, she received a formal reprimand. 3 days after that, she was placed on leave. Allen confronted Myers in her office. "You threatened her license," he said. "She endangered the institution. She asked for a study. She asked to legitimize mythology in a cancer ward." Allen slammed his notebook on the desk. "These children are surviving. You don't have to believe in spirits. Just believe in outcomes." Myers stood. "You think this is noble, but it's dangerous. If this story gets out, if parents begin demanding dog ghosts instead of chemotherapy, we'll have a lawsuit on our hands. Or worse, children refusing treatment." Allen's voice was low and deadly calm. "You're not protecting medicine, you're protecting branding." She leaned forward, eyes cold. "There is no room in this hospital for superstition." He stared at her, then said, "There are some things you need to believe in before you can understand them." She laughed bitterly. "You sound like a priest." "No," Allen said, stepping back. "I sound like a doctor who remembers what mercy looks like." He left without another word. That night, Danny received a text from an unknown number. Just an image, blue, and a single line of text. "We keep going." The war became ritual. Each night, at least one nurse would walk the halls with an extra photo tucked inside their clipboard. Some slipped them under pillows. Some taped them behind biohazard signs. Some carried nothing but intention. But it worked. Not every time. Not for everyone. But often enough to matter. One boy, Thomas 8, began drawing blue without being prompted. One girl, Kaylee 10, started sleeping through the night for the first time in 2 months. Her mother whispered, "She says he comes and hums." No one taught the dog to hum, but no one questioned it. Meanwhile, the board prepared to issue a formal policy statement. A ban on unverified spiritual references in patient interactions. A clause that would make any discussion of blue grounds for termination. Alan heard the rumors. He read the draft. Then he locked his notebook in a drawer and wrote a letter of his own. To every nurse, every technician, every quiet believer. Keep the lights low. Keep the door cracked. Keep your hearts open. He's not gone. By now, the entire pediatric floor had divided itself. 2 sides, those who followed policy, and those who followed presence. One believed in vitals, the other in warmth that didn't show on charts, but changed lives anyway. The war had no guns, but it had casualties. Dr. Zhang never came back. A nurse named Brent, who printed dozens of photos, was reassigned to records. Danny received a final warning, one more violation, and she'd be out. But none of them stopped, because in room 212, Zoe was healing. Not just surviving. Healing. Every night she whispered, "Come if you want. I'm not afraid anymore." Every night the temperature dipped, sometimes only for a second. But enough. The hospital never made a public statement. Too dangerous. Too strange. Too beautiful. But behind the walls, in the hidden places, the battle for belief waged on. Fought in drawings, in data, in silence, and in the trembling, undeniable truth that sometimes healing comes on 4 legs wrapped in memory, moving through darkness, invisible, uninvited, and absolutely unstoppable. It started with a pinboard, one that lived inside a locked closet on the 2nd floor between the linen room and the fire exit no one ever used. Dr. Allen called it the map. It wasn't a map of geography, but of something more fragile: patterns, places, moments. At first it was just a few printouts, telemetry graphs, thermal screenshots, post-midnight vitals. Then came the drawings, the nurse reports, the timestamps, the names of the children who had whispered about the cold nose or dreamed of a blue dog with sad eyes. Allen stood before it now, arms folded, eyes locked on the overlapping pins. Red lines connected 6 cases, then 8, then 11. Every one of them showed a vital pattern shift within 60 seconds of a sudden localized temperature drop, always focused at the back of the neck. Every one of them showed signs of stabilization afterward. Improvement, some even full remission. He took a marker and drew a single phrase across the top of the board in block letters. "Where he walks, they stay." Meanwhile, Danny was reviewing thermal footage again, this time of Kaylee, the girl with lymphoma, who hadn't slept through a full night in months. 17:04 am. The curve appeared, but this time it wasn't just the cold. It was something else, just barely visible. Not heat, not mass. A shimmer, faint, like someone had breathed into the lens. She stared at the screen for 10 full minutes, then screen captured the frame and emailed it to Alan with one line: "He's still coming." The map grew, and with it, the tension. The nurses shared it like contraband. A thumb drive passed between hands, private screens in supply closets, paper notes shredded after reading. And then, the accident. An intern brought her cousin, a freelance photojournalist, to visit the pediatric wing. He was taking a human interest piece on childhood illness. The usual teddy bears, murals, 4 poles. He asked for permission to photograph a few rooms with their curtains open. Zoe's room was one of them. She was asleep. The nurse said yes. The cousin took the shot from the hallway. A soft, wide-angle image, Zoe in bed, the corner of a stuffed dog, visible near her shoulder, her mother reading nearby. But when he reviewed the photo later, he froze. Near the pillow above her nape, there was a distortion, like smoke, but more shaped, slightly curved, too deliberate, and in the haze, faint but undeniable 2 glowing points. Not bright, but centered, symmetrical. Eyes. The photo hit the internet 3 days later. Not as a headline. Not as a scoop, just a casual post on a photo blog, Strange Mist, captured in Children's Hospital. Someone screenshotted it, reposted it, commented, then someone else zoomed in. Adjusted contrast brightened the midtones. The outline of a dog's face began to form, wide-set eyes, narrow muzzle, a scarf shape at the neck. The internet did what the internet does. It named him Ghost Dog, Blue the Healer, Paw of the Beyond. Within 48 hours, the photo had gone viral. Over 1 million views. Hashtag #blue returns. Comments flooded in. "I don't care if it's real. I hope it is. That dog's been through more than half the doctors I know. My kid beat leukemia. She still draws a dog just like that. Hospitals need more Blues, living or not. Do ghosts smell like medicine? The world was watching now. Inside the hospital chaos, the board called an emergency meeting. Security was dispatched to scrub camera access. Alan was summoned, accused of leaking private images. He laughed loud, bitter, exhausted. You think I gave that photo to a blog? You think I'd risk Zoe's safety for a headline? You're the only one obsessed enough, Myers snapped. No, he said, standing slowly. I'm the only one listening. They threatened suspension again. He walked out before they finished the sentence. The pediatric wing was a different world now. Every room had a new energy. Children whispering stories to one another. Drawings of dogs with halos appearing on walls. A child from another ward never met Zoe. Asked his mother, when will the cold dog come visit me? Even staff began to split. Some printed the viral photo and taped it to their clipboards. Others deleted it from their phones in fear. One senior nurse went on record calling it dangerous manipulation of grieving families. Another quiet shy nearing retirement left a note in Alan's drawer that read, "He came the night my daughter died. I never told anyone." Until now. Alan updated the map. 23 cases. Same timestamp. Same temperature curve. Same turn in prognosis. But now, a new line of evidence belief. Belief that wasn't blind. It was earned. It was whispered by children too sick to lie. It was drawn in crayon, etched into pillowcases, reflected in monitors, and breathed into the room by something that had no voice, only presence. One morning, a reporter called the hospital switchboard. Is it true, she asked. Is there really a dog saving children? Myers released a statement. We take all claims seriously, but there is no scientific evidence supporting supernatural interventions in our facility. But it was too late. The story had left the building. Alan stood outside room 212 that night, staring through the glass. Zoe was asleep. The photo of Blue was taped beside her bed again. Next to it was a new drawing. This one showed Blue, and around him hands. Children's hands. Reaching, touching, not grabbing, not pulling, just holding, supporting. One word scrawled across the bottom. Together. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't kick down doors. It didn't scream through data. It simply appeared. In pixels, in heartbeats, in moments that didn't make sense, but made healing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Because belief doesn't need permission, only proof. And night after night at 2:17 a.m., Blue kept proving. The order came on a Thursday afternoon, printed on hospital letterhead, sealed in an envelope that made its way from the executive suite to the pediatric wing like a verdict descending from a place that had never smelled fear or sickness or grief. Effective immediately. Patient Zoe M. will be transferred to St. James Memorial within 48 hours for continuation of care. The note cited resource optimization. Everyone knew what it meant. They were removing her, removing the problem. Danny held the letter in trembling hands, the words swimming in front of her like smoke. She glanced through the glass wall of room 212, where Zoe was sketching in silence, unaware that her fate had been decided in a room she'd never see. Alan arrived minutes later. He didn't need to read the letter. He already knew. I'm not letting them move her, Danny said, voice low, fierce. You don't have a choice, Alan replied, eyes dark with something deeper than anger. None of us do. She's not a liability, she's a child, No, Alan said quietly. She's a miracle, and they're afraid of what they can't brand. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Danny said, We have one night left. Alan didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. Zoe was told the news over dinner. Her mother tried to soften the blow, made it sound like an adventure, a place with bigger windows and brighter rooms. But Zoe wasn't 8 in the way most 8-year-olds were. She listened, she nodded, and then she turned to Danny. Will Blue come with me? Danny hesitated, but before she could answer, Zoe whispered no. He can't. Her mother reached out, tried to hold her hand, but Zoe pulled away and looked at the photo on the nightstand. I think he knows it's my last night, she said. If he comes to say goodbye, I'll be okay. The hospital never intended to record anything that night. The thermal cameras were long gone, but a nurse, one of the quiet believers, left her phone recording on a shelf behind the tissue box. Just in case. The video lasted just under 6 hours. For the first 5, nothing happened. Zoe lay in bed dozing on and off, sometimes staring at the ceiling, sometimes whispering to the photo of Blue. At 2:42 a.m., the room's overhead light flickered once. At 2:17 Nosro, the temperature at the back of Zoe's neck dropped by 3.9 degrees. The camera caught nothing visible. No shadow, no shimmer, only motion. At 2:17:03, the photo of Blue on the nightstand tipped forward and fell, landing face down on the floor with a gentle thud. Zoe stirred, not alarmed, but comforted. Her eyes opened slowly, and she whispered, "You came." She didn't cry. She didn't call for help. She just lay still. A long breath escaped her lips. The heart monitor beside her pulsed with perfect rhythm, 82 beats per minute. Steady, clean, alive. At 6:12 a.m., Dr. Allen submitted his resignation letter. He didn't deliver it in person. He slid it under the door of the administrator's office before the sun came up, then walked the halls one last time. He stopped outside room 212. Zoe was still asleep. Danny stood beside her, hand resting gently on the bed rail. Allen didn't speak, just nodded. She nodded back, tears forming but not falling. He left before Zoe woke up. The letter was brief. 3 paragraphs. Typed, no embellishment. But the final line would echo far beyond the walls of the hospital. What is sacred cannot be measured. What is true cannot be erased. And what is healing sometimes walks on 4 legs. The sacred doesn't live in textbooks. It lives in rooms like 212. It was signed simply, A.R. The news of Allen's resignation broke that afternoon. The hospital released a vague statement. The staff didn't ask for details. They already knew. One nurse printed his final words and taped them inside the break room cupboard. Someone else printed a copy and slipped it into Zoe's discharge folder between the radiology reports and the insurance forms. Zoe left quietly the next day. No headlines, no sirens. Her mother wheeled her out, one hand on her shoulder, the other holding a small photo frame turned inward to protect the glass. Inside, Blue, drawn by Zoe in her favorite gray pencil. No words, just eyes. Gentle, knowing. As they rolled through the lobby, a janitor stopped sweeping. He looked down at Zoe, nodded once, and whispered, "He doesn't leave forever. Just when he's needed somewhere else." Zoe smiled. She didn't look back. And that night, in room 212, empty, sterilized, cleared for repainting, something strange happened. The motion sensor light near the door flicked on. The thermostat dipped by 2 degrees. And at 2:17 a.m., exactly, a nurse passing by paused, turned to the glass, and swore. Just for a moment, she saw a shimmer behind the bed, a crescent of cool breath, curved, gentle, familiar. He came one last time, to say goodbye, but not to vanish, just to remind them. What loves deeply doesn't die. It lingers. 4 months passed. Seasons turned, but for the doctors at St. James Memorial, time stood still every time Zoe's name came up, because nothing made sense anymore. Not her numbers, not her charts, not her recovery. It began slowly. The bruising faded faster than expected. Then her white blood cell count began to rise. By week 5, she no longer needed the transfusion schedule they'd mapped out. By week 8, she was strong enough to walk without a chair. By week 10, she was running. The tumor shrinking, the inflammation receding. And the chemo stopped completely. The decision had come with hesitancy, even protest. The lead oncologist had never seen a response like this without intervention. He called it a statistical anomaly. But anomaly or not, Zoe no longer needed aggressive treatment. She was healing, alive, awake. And every night before sleep, she whispered softly into her pillow, "Thank you." The nurses at St. James called her the quiet miracle. She never acted out, never refused pills. But she always asked for one thing. Every room she stayed in, she placed a single-frame drawing beside her bed. She never explained it to the new doctors. It was a sketch of a dog, gray and soft, with a scarf wrapped gently around its neck. A ghost, maybe, or something else. One of the orderlies once tried to move the photo during a routine cleaning. Zoe asked gently but firmly that it be returned. "He's watching," she said. "Even here." By month 4, Zoe had no detectable cancer markers. Her blood work was stable. Her scans were clear. "She's not just in remission," the lead doctor whispered to his team. "She's beyond remission." There were no words for what the data said, because the data said she should not be here. And yet there she was, drawing, dancing in the hallway, feeding birds outside the courtyard window, alive. On her final day at St. James, Zoe wore a yellow dress with tiny paw prints embroidered along the hem, sewn lovingly by one of the nurses who had taken to her like a niece. She walked out of the room without help, her hair beginning to grow back in soft tufts beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Her mother waited by the exit doors. As Zoe approached, she held tightly to a small frame pressed to her chest. The same one. The sketch of Blue. No tears, just breath and joy. The doctors stood in silence, watching her leave. One tried to say something, anything, but the words failed him. Because, what do you say when science steps aside and lets something else take the wheel? The attending nurse whispered, "I think he came to finish what he started." No one laughed. No one scoffed. Because in that moment, every person in that hallway knew. They had just seen a kind of healing that textbooks could never contain. Zoe turned once halfway through the lobby, looked over her shoulder, smiled. "I told you," she said, then walked out into the sun. Back at the original hospital room 212 had long since been repainted. New curtains, new monitors, new child. But the night Zoe left St. James, something curious happened. The motion sensor light outside 212 flicked on at 2:17 a.m. No footsteps followed. Just air. Cool, soft, present. Inside, the child sleeping there, stirred, turned, and whispered in her dream. "He's back." In Zoe's home, a new shelf had been placed near her bed. On it, books, a potted plant, and the frame. Beside it, a candle burned faintly. Each night before sleep, Zoe placed one hand on the glass, smiled, and whispered, "You can rest now, too." She never explained it to visitors. Never told the full story again, because some things don't need retelling, only remembering. And across the world, in email chains, in whispered phone calls, the story traveled. Did you hear about the girl who healed without chemo? Did you see the dog photo? Did you read the resignation letter? Some called it miracle. Some called it madness. But Zoe, she didn't call it anything. She just lived. And in the quiet spaces when no one was listening, she still felt the cool brush behind her neck. Not every night. Not anymore. Just when she needed it. That was the real miracle. Not survival. Not science-defying recovery. But something deeper. That in a world addicted to evidence, something invisible had reached through the noise. And healed. They never announced it. There was no memo, no press release, no board meeting. But one quiet morning, 3 weeks after Zoe's final discharge, something changed at the pediatric oncology wing. It began with room 212. A new patient had just arrived. Amelia, age 7. Wilm's tumor, stage 3. Scared, pale, silent. As the admitting nurse tucked her in, she paused near the bed, reached into her cart, and pulled out a small wooden frame. Inside was a drawing graphite on paper soft lines. Big eyes, gentle mouth. A scarf around the dog's neck. "Blue." She placed the frame on the shelf beside the saline bags and tissue box. No explanation, just presence. That night, Amelia whispered to her mother, "I think someone's dog came to check on me." Her mother smiled, exhausted. "There's no dog here, sweetie." Amelia shrugged, eyes wide but calm. "Maybe not now." But he was. The tradition spread without a word, room by room, frame by frame, each image slightly different. Some photos, some sketches, some faded to near abstraction, but always the same eyes, the same warmth, the same scarf. The nurses called it the Blue Protocol. They never wrote it down. They just knew. No matter how many patients came through those doors, no matter how many charts were logged or monitors beeped, there would always be something else in the room. Something no machine could measure. And the children, they felt it first. One boy, Devin, age 9, arrived during a thunderstorm. Scared of needles, wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak. 2 days in, he pointed to the photo on his wall and asked, "Can I pet him?" The nurse smiled. He doesn't mind. Later that week, Devin began drawing again. In the center of every page, the dog. One image showed the hospital bed monitor's A4 stand, and Blue nose pressed to Devin's neck. The drawing made its way back to the nurse's station. Someone wept. A 6-year-old girl named Rhea refused to sleep alone after her first chemo round. She clung to the rails of her bed crying until she choked. The nurses tried everything, teddy bears, lullabies, even sedation. Nothing worked. Until a night nurse sat beside her and whispered, "There's a dog that visits when you're brave." Rhea blinked. "What's his name?" "Blue." The girl slowly lay back. "Okay," she whispered. "He can come now." And he did. That night she slept. The doctors pretended not to notice. They walked past the frames without comment. They ignored the whispered stories, the crayon drawings, the overheard giggles of children describing something fuzzy and blue that made the cold feel nice. But they didn't remove the frames. Not one. Because even if they didn't believe, they knew it worked. Danny kept a folder in her locker. Dozens of drawings, every one given freely by a child, most never having heard the story of Zoe or Blue or the room where it all began. And yet, the same figure appeared again and again. Always near the bed, always watching. One day she found a drawing left on her desk. No name. Just a single sentence scrawled in uneven print at the bottom. "He knows when I'm scared." Even new staff felt it. A freshly recruited nurse, Julia found herself assigned to the night shift. She was skeptical, clinical, efficient. She didn't understand why some rooms had dog pictures and others didn't. "Comfort psychology," she muttered once. "Whatever works." But one night around 2:20 a.m., she passed room 210 and paused. The hallway was cold. She stepped inside. The monitor on the girl's vitals showed a subtle dip heart rate, easing oxygen rising. The girl stirred, turned, whispered. He was sniffing. Who? Julia asked softly. The dog with the scarf. Julia backed out of the room, said nothing. But the next morning, she taped a fresh copy of Blue's image to the nurse station bulletin board. It wasn't magic. It wasn't medicine. It was something in between. A presence, a memory that refused to fade. A quiet force that moved between machines and monitors through curtains and cries, answering no call but always arriving on time. Some nights, Danny swore she felt a breeze brush her ankles as she sat beside a patient. Some nights, the temperature monitors would spike in reverse cooling instead of heating, and always the curve returned. Soft, subtle, curved like a muzzle. No one knew where the original drawing was anymore, the one Zoe had carried out with her. But that didn't matter, because by now Blue had become more than a sketch. He had become a message. You are not alone. And every child who stared at his image, whether in fear and hope or in wonder, felt the same thing. That someone else had walked this road before and made it safe. One evening, as Danny was organizing patient files, a nurse burst into the office holding a sheet of notebook paper. You need to see this. The paper was thin, the lines smudged with pencil. A girl named Emily, 7, newly diagnosed, no history with Zoe or Blue, had been given a free draw hour. She produced a picture of herself in bed, tears down her cheeks. Beside her stood a dog, gray, long ears, head bowed, and one sentence printed in quiet block letters. He knows where the pain is. Danny sat down, held the paper to her chest, didn't speak for a long time. In the end, there was no plaque for Blue, no statue, no foundation, just frames and stories and drawings tucked into file folders that made nurses cry long after their shifts had ended. But in the stillness of each room at 2:17 a.m., the air sometimes changed, not for everyone, not every night, but just enough for the ones who needed him. Because some spirits aren't meant to haunt. Some return to help, to stay, to finish what they started, and then to wait for the next name whispered in the dark. Blue wasn't gone. He had simply become part of the building, of the breath between sobs, of the space between science and hope. And in every child's drawing, every one of them, he was smiling. The cabin sat on the edge of the Monterey woods, where the fog rolled in like a second skin, and the wind carried the scent of pine and sea salt. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't demand attention, but offered it gently. Dr. Allen had been retired for 6 months. He didn't miss the buzz of the hospital or the meetings or the endless war between belief and protocol. But he missed the children, the fragile voices, the defiant stares, the way their fear always somehow held hands with hope. And he missed room 212. That room had never been just a room. It had been a doorway, a veil. A place where the known world cracked slightly and let something sacred pass through. Now he lived alone. Mostly. Most mornings began with the sound of paws on hardwood. Rustle, pad, sniff, thump. His new companion, a rescue mutt with storm gray fur, one ear that flopped sideways and eyes that never quite blinked at the same time, was named Leo. Not Blue, but close enough. He never asked for affection, just stayed nearby, guarded the silence. And some nights when Alan couldn't sleep, he'd find Leo sitting by the window staring into nothing, as if waiting for someone who never really left. It was during one of those nights that the radio station called. Local, low-watt, late-night programming. They wanted stories, real ones. The host's voice was warm, soft-edged. I heard you used to be a doctor, she said. I used to be a lot of things, Alan replied, chuckling. Doctor's just what they called me when I wore the coat. You said you wanted to share something. Yes, he said, glancing down at Leo, now curled at his feet. I want to talk about healing. The kind that doesn't come from prescriptions. She let him go on, and Alan did. His voice was steady, but there was something in it, something that trembled beneath the calm. Like the surface of a lake, holding back a storm. There was a dog, he began. He didn't belong to any one person, but he belonged to the hospital, the kids. He never needed commands, never asked for anything. He just showed up. Alan paused. I've seen drugs work. I've seen surgeries save lives. I've seen machines pull people back from the edge. But I've also seen children hang on day after day just because something soft and silent curled up beside them at night. He cleared his throat. And I've seen what happens when that silence disappears. The radio line was quiet for a beat. Then the host asked, Do you think it was something supernatural? Alan laughed, low and honest. I think there are wounds only dogs know how to find. Places in us that medicine can't reach. His voice cracked then just slightly, and I think some medicines don't have names. Just scents, like warm fur, or old bandages, or a nose pressed right here. He tapped the back of his own neck, reminding you that you're still here, still worth holding on to. After the segment aired, something strange happened. Letters arrived. Emails, dozens of them, from parents, from former patients, from nurses and aides, and even one janitor who said he remembered a cold that never felt scary. One message simply read, "I was in room 214. He visited me too." Another, "My daughter drew him." I never understood until now. One more, "I thought I was crazy. Thank you for telling me I wasn't." At the hospital, no one spoke of Alan's broadcast directly, but one nurse printed a transcript and left it in the staff lounge. Someone underlined a single line in pen. Some medicines don't have names. They taped it to the break room fridge. It stayed there, undefaced, unread aloud, but always noticed. And far from the hospitals, in a single bedroom lit only by a nightlight, a child lay awake. Her name was Liana, 5 years old, in remission, still scared. She stared at the shadows on the wall, heart thumping, too afraid to cry. Then came the feeling, faint, a shift in the air, a pressure behind her neck, cold but gentle, like someone had leaned close just to make sure she hadn't drifted too far from herself. Her breath calmed, her shoulders loosened. She smiled, no words spoken, none needed. Outside her door, the hallway light flickered once, then went still. Back in the cabin, Alan stood on the porch, mug in hand, Leo by his side. The stars were clear tonight, quiet, infinite. Alan looked down at the dog. "You ever feel like someone's still walking beside you?" he asked softly. Leo didn't move, but Alan felt it. Not in sight, not in sound, just a feeling. Behind him, beside him. Like a second breath he hadn't taken. The story never made headlines. No awards, no peer-reviewed journals, just a thread of whispered memories passed hand to hand, room to room. And a photo worn at the edges, but never thrown away, resting beside the beds of children too young to explain what they knew, yet old enough to feel it. A dog, a scarf, a silent vow. "I will find you when you're almost gone, and gently bring you back." It always began the same way. A sudden quiet, a soft chill, a breath at the nape of the neck, and then peace.